Hello, and today we'll be learning transformations of parent functions. So we'll begin with parabolas. So transformation of a quadratic parent function, which is neutral, is the blue part, and modified is the red part. So neutral of a quadratic function is f of x is equal to x squared. So that is our usual parabola. Now the modified is g of x is equal to 10x squared. Parameter a, or the coefficient, modifies slope. So a slope greater than 1 is steeper than the parent, and a slope less than 1 is less steeper than the parent. So now we go to domain and range. Since they're both parabolas, domain is all real numbers, and since they're positive parabolas, range begins at 0 and it continues on forever. Now we got square root parent function, which is f of x equal to the square root of x, or x to the power of 0.5. If you put 2 on opposite sides of the x-axis, then it looks like a sideways parabola. Alright, well let's go back to subject. G of x is equal to negative parentheses 10x 0.5 parentheses. So since negative is in front of the whole equation and it's in front of the parentheses, that means it's opposite of the x-axis. So it means that I have to go opposite the x-axis, and here it is. Now since it's 10x, parameter a, that means that the slope is 10 times as steep as our neutral. So it is really steep, as shown barely registering on the graph. So now domain and range, since we can't have a square root of a negative number, domain has to be equal to or greater than 0, and range has to cooperate with domain. So y is equal to or greater than 0 as well. Now we go back to parabolas, and this is a simple problem, yet is one of the most basic, needed to do almost all the problems, and it is neutral. F of x equals x squared, or a basic parent, or a quadratic parent function, and we got our modifier, which is g of x is equal to x squared plus 10. So plus 10, so both of them have the same slope, and plus 10 is just a y-intercept, or where the y crosses the origin, to be exact, or a specific point we're looking for if on the line. But since this is a parabola, it's for the origin. So this just tells the location of where the origin begins. So 10 positive paces up, because it's plus 10, so it's 10 positive paces up and starts at 0, 10. So now, since these both are parabolas, domain is all real numbers, but range changes a bit. Range for our neutral begins at 0 because it starts at origin, which is 0, 0, which the y-coordinate is 0. Now range, since this y-coordinate slash y-intercept is 10, then the range begins at 10. Or our to our v graphs, or absolute value. So f of x is equal to absolute value of x, which is our neutral graph, as described in the blue lines, and our modifier g of x is equal to absolute value of 5x minus 10. Since minus 10 is outside of the absolute value brackets, that means that our origin is negative 10 paces. So that means it's down 10 paces, or 10 units, and origin is 0, negative 10, which brings us to our domain and range. So domain is all real numbers because, first of all, it goes on for infinity on both sides, and second of all, because these resemble a form of a 90-degree form of a parabola. So now here is that since the neutral starts at the origin, the range begins at 0, and since the modified begins at 0, negative 10, or y coordinate is negative 10, range begins at negative 10. So now describing this is that since parameter a slash coefficient is greater than 1, which is 5, then our slope is, then our graph slash slope is 5 times as steep as one of the, such as a graph or one of the slopes of neutral. We got back to parabolas. Alright, we got a bit different here. Right, our neutral, usual parabola, now we got modified. Fifth, parentheses, x minus 10, close parentheses, squared. Alright, 1/5, it's less than 1. So that means that our parabola, this new parabola, it is less steeper than our parent. And now since we got internal subtraction slash addition, this is subtraction, but there's also addition in some other graphs, that means that subtraction is always to the right of the y-axis, and addition is always to the left of the y-axis. So subtraction is right, addition is left. Now here is domain and range. So the domain, since parabolas are real numbers, and the range, since they both begin at 0, so it's like, so the y coordinate is 0, that means that they begin at 0. So y is equal to greater than 0. Now we go back to our parabolas. Neutral, modified. Alright, so our coefficient is greater than 1, so it is steeper, and if you usually look at it, it looks steeper, so that is a check. X plus 10, alright, we're internally adding, so we move 10 pace, so adding is left, subtraction is right, so we add, so we move 10 units left, and we end up negative 10, and that's how it goes. Now domain and range, domain and parabolas are real numbers, and since it just moves on the x-axis, range always begins at 0. Alright, here's a new version of this, a bit trickier, but I'll explain. Alright, our usual parabola, neutral, modified. Alright, we got negative / opposite sign in front of the whole equation in front of parentheses, so we flip it over. So right here we start. Now it's internal addition, so we move 10 units to the left, right there. Now it is adding y-intercept, adding 10 units up, so we right there's origin. And now what is it? So we know from our neutral parabola that domain and range, that domain is all real numbers and range is greater than 0. Now for this is, since it's negative, range, it has to be less than whatever the origin is, but domain is all real numbers, but range is less than 10 because 0, 10 is the origin. Our last and most favorite graph, according to me, is our exponential parent function, which f of x is equal to base exponent x. Base is chosen for the parent function as 2 because it fits in the graph, whatever graph chosen, and also because it is the simplest number you can choose for to cube, square, etc. So our modified is g of x is equal to 10 to the power of x minus 10 minus 4. This part of the modified cancels each other out for almost 9 units and then skyrockets like the parent function. So going into domain and range, domain for both of these, since they skyrocket to infinity, is all real numbers, and range, well, range for the parent function, this graph does not touch y, although it looks like it never does. So it's, since considering the fact that it gets so darn close to 0, it's safe to assume when writing down that y is greater than 0, but sometimes has to be equal to it because it gets so darn close. Now for our modified, our range begins at 4, and since it's the lowest point, lowest y intercept there at 4, then our range begins at -4 and then skyrockets to infinity. So in this week's 4 graphs, and we explored 3 parameters, if you've noticed, and hopefully you did, because or else you didn't learn anything and you have to watch this video again. Right, so our parameters are a, which is the coefficient of x, h, the number inside the parentheses, and k, the number outside the parentheses. Now x, right here, parameter a changes the slope of the equation, so it makes the equation steeper or less steeper. Parameter h, subtracting / adding inside the parentheses, moves the parent function to the left or right of the y-axis. And parameter k, the number outside the parentheses, or the y-intercept, moves the graph or the graph's origin up or down the y-axis. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope you learned something new.